Hilchas Mechirah Perek Revi. Now, here the Rambam is going to speak about the din that a kelev of a adam, a keli, if something finds itself in your keli, you could be kaina, as long as the keli finds itself in a place where it's allowed to be. But if the keli finds itself in a place where you have reshus to put it, the lekech has a reshus to put it, so the fact that the item finds itself in the keli, that's in itself a kinyan. Now, the kinyan, the Rambam compares it to a kinyan hagbo, as if you would have picked it up, or as if it would have been in your chotzer. And the Sameach points out that there's a maila in kinyan chotzer legabi hagbo, and a maila in hagbo legabi kinyan chotzer. Marshal, a goy doesn't have a kinyan chotzer. So the chiddush over here is that a keli, even a goy, a keli has a din of a kinyan hagbo. A goy has a kinyan hagbo. So a keli for a goy would also be kena. On the other end, the hagbo is only kena if you have das. Chotzer shalodam is even kena leishli medaite. So mele, that's the mile of chotzer. That's how what he points out Lashon Rambam, that a keli is not stam a chotzer. It's a chotzer and it's hagbo. So mele, it has the milas of chotzer that is kena shli medaite, and it's a mile of hagbo that is even kena ba'goy. That's what he points out. I'll call upon him. Perek Revi. Kelev shalodam kol mokim sheyeshu l'rshus la'anichei konolei. There's a din that something that finds itself in your keli is koine for you. This says kivin shenichnu sham metaltelen betecha kelim. Betecha keli is ein the keli of the lekeach is, or the kabla matone ein echad v'em yochel lachzer bei. In ba'areze k'misha egbion, as if the lekeach would have picked it up, oy k'meshahun chu betech beisu, as if it was lying in his house. Which is another the kinyan. It's similar. In other words, has the din of a kinyan agbo and has the din of kinyan chotzer. Lefichach. Ein kelev shalodim kena le b'reshus harabim, because in reshus harabim you have no right to put your keli down in the reshus harabim, and also v'le b'reshus hamecher, and the reshus hamecher is also, it's not your place to put your keli down. So therefore, even though the item finds itself in the keli of the lekeach, but since the keli of the lekeach finds itself on an area where he doesn't really have a right to be, so therefore he's not kena. Ella im amle hamakna lechu keni b'keli zeh. If the moicher told him be koine with this keli, so Mele, even though the keli finds itself b'reshus hamecha, but Lepeli is telling him clearly lechu knei b'keli zeh. So Mele is giving him reshus to have that keli there. V'chein im kona hakeli tchila. This is a keli that he actually bought from the mecher for something else. You know, first he bought a keli, and now he's buying an item in this keli. V'chein im kona hakeli tchila, and v'higbia he made a ma'ase kinyan on this keli, he made a hagbo on the keli because it's b'reshus hamecher, because that's the only kinyan that would work b'reshus hamecher. V'achar kach hinichi sham b'reshus hamecher. Then he put it down. In other words, he bought the item from the mecher. He bought the item through hagbo. Then he put it down on the floor in the reshus hamecher, and then on the ground, and then v'chazer v'kanim mimena haperes. And then he went ahead and bought the peres from the mecher. There was the peres that the mecher was selling to him, and he put into this keli which was lying in the reshus hamecher, which he just bought from the mecher. Is kivin shenichnusu betech keli zeh. Once the peres go into this keli, he's also kanesam b'pnei shahanoas hamecher b'mchiras hakeli. Is therefore ein makbel mekemi. In such a case, the mecher is not makbel mekemi. Is the nekudas advarim is that a keli of a person could be koiner for him. It could be koiner like a chotzer. It could be koiner like hagbo. That's this din. But the hagbala is that it has to be in a place where you're allowed to keep it there. You're allowed to put the keli there. So that would exclude the reshus harabim. That would exclude a place b'reshus hamecher. B'reshus hamecher, it would work if the mecher clearly told you lechu uknei b'keli zeh. So even though the keli is b'reshus hamecher, he's kena b'reshus hamecher. Or if he bought the keli mi hamecher, he just bought this keli. No, not just. He bought this keli from the mecher, and now he's putting the keli. He bought it b'hagbo. He made a kinyan b'hagbo. Now he's putting this keli down in the reshus hamecher. So then the stam das is that since the mecher had hanoah from selling him this keli, so he's not makbid that the keli is now lying on the ground of the mecher. So therefore, the lekeach could go ahead and be koine peres in the reshus hamecher. Halacha beis. Kshem she'en kelev shel lekeach kena l'reshus hamecher. Just like even though the keli of the lekeach b'chlal is kena for him, but if the keli shel lekeach finds itself b'reshus hamecher, so that says the keli finds itself b'reshus hamecher, so that's mevalvel the kinyan of the keli is kach and kelev shel mecher kena l'lekeach afal pi shu b'reshus halekeach. So in other words, the shame, you have to understand the l'shem over here. In other words, the idea is that the fact that the keli of the lekech is lying on the reshus of the mecher, that's mevalvo the afsharius for the lekech being koina bekelev. Sal derech zeh, when a person has something lying in his reshus, but it's not directly in his reshus, it's lying in the kelev shel mecher. So in other words, there's a chayfetz that you want to buy from the mecher, and it's lying in the reshus in the kelev of the mecher, but the kelev of mecher is in your reshus. Let's say it's lying in my reshus. So you say no, but since lepel it's lying in the kelev shel mecher, so the kelev shel mecher is mevalvul your efsharius to be kind of that item, even though that item b'chlolis is in your reshus, but it's in kelev shel mecher. Al derech zeh, the kelev shel mecher. The kelev, the fact that the kelev shel lekech is lying on the reshus of the mecher is also mevalvul. The bilbul is working both ways. If the item is on the ground of the lekech, everything's fine. If the item is in the keli of the lekech, and the keli of the lekech is on the ground of the lekech, is also fine. But if the item is in the reshus of the lekech, but lepel it's bekelev shel mecher, or the item is in the kelev shel lekech, but lepel is b'shus shel mecher, so both of them, there's like a zaytik bilbul, and that zaytik bilbul doesn't let that there should be a ma'aser kinyan. Halacha gimel. Mechirah, there's another kinyan which is called Mechirah. We said b'negei sfina, something which is very hard to make Meshicha, so Chazal instituted Mechirah. Is Mechirah eina koina ela b'reshus harabim, or b'chotzer she'eina shel shneim? If we're talking about a reshus harabim b'chotzer she'eina shel shneim, that's where Mechirah works. And by Meshicha is fakert, there's eina koina ela b'simta, not in the reshus harabim. It has to be like simta, which is a keren zavis in the reshus harabim, or b'chotzer shel shneim. And v'hagbo keina b'chol makom is nachamol. Mechirah has to be either in a reshus harabim or a chotzer she'eina shel shneim. Meshicha has to be either in a simta or in a reshus shel shneim. And hagbo could be in any place. Halacha dalet. Davar hanikna b'meshicha, something which is nikna b'meshicha, knows the item is a type of item nikna b'meshicha, knows it's not something which is easily to pick up, so therefore it's nikna b'meshicha. Is a mhoya b'reshus harabim, and we said before that reshus harabim doesn't help meshicha. Aber umoshcha halikeach l'reshusei, the lekeach pulled it out of the reshus harabim, he pulled it into his reshus elasimta. Is kivin shehit hoitzi mikzas achefetz reshus harabim kona. Even though the whole item is not yet b'reshusei, the whole item is not yet b'simta. He made a ma'aser meshicha, but that ma'aser meshicha went already into the simta, or went into his reshus, so he's kind of. So the pale, he has to make a full meshicha. A full meshicha means that the entire item moved out of its original position. Whereas if the item is 5 feet long, so you have to meshich, and you have to be meshich at least 5 feet in order for the original item to be completely out of its original position. But let's say if the item was 5 feet long, and lepel the item was only 2 feet or 3 feet away from his reshus. Now he pulled the item. He pulled the item for 5 feet. So now he pulled it 3 feet into his reshus, and it's 2 feet still in reshus harabim. So the item completely went out of its reshus, but it didn't completely go into his reshus. It didn't completely go into the simta. So then he's kohen. In other words, the kinyan doesn't have to be all in reshus harabim. It could also be that it started going into the simta, and it started going into his reshus, but on the other end, there has to be a ma'aser meshicha. Ma'aser meshicha means that the item completely went out of the reshus of the area of where it originally was. Halachei. Ton shel peiris shehoya munach b'reshus harabim. So you have a pile of peiris which is lying in the reshus harabim. Umoshchei lekeach l'reshusei l'simta acher shepasek adam. So maybe a little agdama. In order to make a kinyan, in order for a kinyan to be chal, there has to be a gemiras das. So we mentioned in the beginning of Hilchos Mechirah that there are those achreinim that learn that the whole yesod of kinyanim is really gemiras das. In other words, it's not the ma'isa kinyan, it's only the gemiras das, and the whole purpose of the ma'isa kinyan is only for the gemiras das. But whichever way you learn, that's pashut, that in order for a kinyan to work, you have to have gemiras das. If there's no gemiras das, so there's no kinyan. So if a person makes a kinyan on an item, he's buying an item, he's not really sure what the item is going to cost. So Memela, obviously there's no gemiras das. It might be very expensive. He's not going to be interested in the item. So even though he made a ma'aser kinyan, but without knowing how much the item costs, so there's no gemiras das. So it's pashut that such a ma'aser kinyan wouldn't work. Now, however, even though you made a Maisa Kinyan, you don't really know the volume of how much it is. You know how much it costs per liter, you know how much it costs per pound, but you don't really know how many pounds it is or how many liters it is. So even though you don't really know how much it is, but as long as you know the price, so there is Gemiras Das. So if you make a Maisa Kinyan on something which you don't know the price, there's no Gemiras Das. If you make a Maisa Kinyan on something which you know the price, even though you don't know the volume of how much it is, so nevertheless it's considered Gemiras Das. That's the sort of next few halachas. Halacha hey. Ton shel peiros, if you have a pile of peiros, shohayamunach b'rshus harabim. Now umoshchoy likeach l'rshusei, he pulled it il rshusei. In other words, he made a Maisa Kinyan. El simto, he pulled it into the simta, and that was done achar sheposek hadomim, after they made up a price. In other words, the buyer and the seller made up a price, and then the likeach made a Maisa Kinyan. So the din is kona. So then the likeach is kena. Aval pisha adayin limodad. He doesn't know exactly how much it is over there, how much the volume of the item is. He didn't measure it, but nevertheless, since he knows the price of the item and he made a Maisa Meshicha, he's kena. V'chein imodad don halikeach b'shus harabim. So in other words, if the likeach makes a Meshicha, so then he has to make a Meshicha into the Simta or into his Rishus, because in Rishus harabim a Meshicha is not koina. If he makes a Maisa Medida, means he picks it up, he picks the item up, so it's a Maisa Hagbah. Hagbah works in Rishus harabim as well. V'chein imodad don halikeach b'shus harabim. While it was in Rishus harabim, he measured it. So then it's Kana Rishon Bagbo. Each one he picks up in order to measure, he's Kana Bagbo. So B'kitzur, the Nukud is that once there's a Pasek Damim, he's Kana, even though there was no Medida and Kemuvan. That if there was a Medida, and while he's being made, there was a Pasek Damim, and then he's being made echod. So each one that he's made, is Kana. Now, Hoya Halachavav, Hoya Moicher, Moided L'toich Kelev Shalikeach, is Leikana. Why? She'ain Kelev Shalikeach, Kana L'b'shus harabim. In other words, you have a moicher that, let's say, he has his items in Rishus harabim. He makes up to sell something to the lekeach. The lekeach has his kelim in Rishus harabim, and the moicher is taking the items from his kelim and putting it into the kelim of the lekeach. But since the kelim of the lekeach is lying in Rishus harabim, so memela the kinyan doesn't work. Now, that's partial. L'chura, that's partial because there was no Maisa Kinyan. Because since Kelev shel Likeach is not koina for him in Rishus harabim, so the fact that the moicher picked her up and put it into Kelev shel Likeach is not a Maisa Kinyan. That's l'chura partial. Now, Hoya ha-peiros b'Rishus HaLikeach. The peiros were lying already in the Rishus HaLikeach. Is kivin shekibul olav ha-meichel limker. Once they make an agreement that the moicher is going to sell, and it's already lying in the Rishus HaLikeach, is kana likeach. So the likeach is kana. Even though he doesn't know exactly how much it is, but the pill we're talking about, it was pasek. They made up a price. There was made up a price, and it's lying in the rishus of the likeach. So mele the likeach is kana. Now haya b'rishus mecher, but if it was b'rishus mecher, a b'rishus hamufkadim, or a place which is mufked to the mecher, is leikana likeach. The likeach is not kana. Achi yagbia peiros, until he picks up the peiros, which is a kinyan hagbah. Or he takes it out of the Rishus HaMecher by renting the place. Is the Nekudas Hadvarim is that in order for the kinyan to be finalized, there has to be a Maisa Kinyan, and that Maisa Kinyan has to be after Psikas Hadom. It doesn't have to be after Medida, it has to be after Psikas Hadom. That Maisa Kinyan could be through making a Mashicha from the Rishus HaRabim into the Simta. That's one way of making a Maisa Kinyan. There's another way of making a Maisa Kinyan if the peiros were already B'Rishus Lekeach, so there's no necessity for a Maisa Kinyan at all. Masha'inkin, the fact that the Moicher is putting it B'Kelev Shel Lekeach in Rishus HaRabim. So we learned before that the Kelev of the Lekeach is not Koina, a Kelim is not Koina B'Rishus HaRabim, because Lepeils, even though it's his Kelim, but if it's lying in Rishus HaRabim, he has no right to be there. So then it's not a Kinyan. Now, Lepel, if it's lying in the Rishus HaMecher, so the Chavada not a Kinyan, even they made up to sell it. Unless there was a Maisa Kinyan. What would be the Maisa Kinyan? Either that he makes a Hagbah on those peiros, or he makes a Meshich on those peiros, or he's Seicher the peiros, Mekaimam. So when the Lekeach is Seicher, the Mekaim of the peiros, he rents that place. So Memela, that's like a Meshicha. In other words, he's taking it out of the Rishus HaMecher and is putting it into the Rishus HaLekeach. Halacha Zayin. Now, hoya peiros b'simtei b'chasei shel shneim. If the peiros were lying in the simtei b'chasei shel shneim, va'afilo hoya b'rishus lekeach, and lepeil v'hoya b'teich kelev shel mecher, and they were in the Kelev Shel Mecher, and the Kibul Olav HaMecher Limker, and the Mecher made up to sell, and the Hischel HaMecher Limded B'tech Kelev Shel Mecher. So you have the item is lying in a Simta or Chatzis Shel Shneim, which is a place where the Kelev Shel Lekeach could be koine for him. Whereas the Kelev Shel Lekeach can be koine for the Lekeach in a Rishus HaRabim. But the Kelev Shel Lekeach could be koine for the Lekeach in a Simta or a Chatzis Shel Shneim. Now, the item is lying in the Rishus of in the Kelev of the Mecher, and now the Mecher has empty Kelim, and the Mecher is taking the things that are in the Rishus, in the Kelev Shel Mecher, and he's putting it into another Kelev Shel Mecher for the Teva of the Lekeach. In other words, for the Lekeach to be able to get it, and eventually return him those other Kelim. So we say that the Stam Das is that the Mecher is giving over these Kelim to the Lekeach. So even though Lepel, you can't be koine b'Kelev Shel Mecher, even if the Kelev Shel Mecher is in the Rishus HaLekeach, you can't be koine. So certainly if the Kelev Shel Mecher is in the Rishus HaRabim or b'Chatzis Shel Shneim, for sure you can't be koine. But over here, since the Mecher is taking the item, and he's taking it out of his Keli, and he's putting it into these Kelim of the Mecher, b'Chatzis Shel Shneim, or b'Simta, so we say that the Stam Das is that the Mecher wants to be makna, these kelim to the lekeach in order for him to be koine with these kelim. Memela the lekeach is koine. That's the chiddush of this halacha. Lomer anachamal. Hoya peiris besimte bechatzis shel shneim and lepel v'hai fila hoya b'rishus lekeach. They were in the rishus of the lekeach. Aber de lepel v'hoya b'tech kelev shel mecher. Lepel they were lying in the kelev shel mecher. So mele kelev shel mecher. So it's in the mecher. Now v'kibul olav ha-mecher limker. The mecher accepted upon himself to sell. And the hischel ha-mecher limdeid b'tech kelev shel mecher. He started putting it into other kelim of the mecher. So is azay. Im amale kur b'shleishim sela ani mecher l'cha. He made up a price, a price for the whole sale that he's selling him a kur, which is 30 saw for 30 sela. So then is yochel lagzer be'afilu b'so achreina. So since the deal was that he's selling him a whole kur for 30 sela, so until he sells him the whole amount, until he transfers, the whole amount into those kelev shel mecher, which he's really lending him, giving it to him, so then he could be chayzer. Heil v'adayin ha-peiros b'kelev. The peiros are still in the kelev of the mecher, and v'lei gomer kol hamida. He didn't finish measuring. And the kelev shel mecher doch ein kelev lekech. Afal b'shib b'shus ha-lekech. So even though they made up to sell, he made up to sell the 30 saw, the kur b'shleishim sela, and the item finds itself in the Rishus HaLekeach, but it finds itself in Kelev Shel Mecher B'Rishus HaLekeach. Since it finds itself in Kelev Shel Mecher B'Rishus HaLekeach, so the sale wasn't finalized. However, V'im Amalei Kur B'Shleishim, and then he finished off Saw B'Sela, so it comes out that he's selling him each saw for a seller, so then is Rishon Kana. So each saw that he measures into Kelev Shel Mecher, again, the Mecher is taking items, this tvua which finds itself in Kelev Shel Mecher, and he's putting it into other Kelev Shel Mecher. And this is not being done either B'Rishus HaLekeach or B'Simto or B'Rishus Shel Shneim, where the Kelev Shel Lekeach could work, but Lepel is not putting in the Kelev Shel Mecher, Kelev Lekeach, he's putting in the Kelev Shel Mecher. So the Chiddush over here, since the Mecher is putting it, the Kelev Shel Mecher, other Kelim, so it's like he's lending it to the Lekeach, and Memela, the Lekeach is Kena, is Nachama. Is Rishon Yishukena Shekivin Sheposku Adam Al Kol Sovaso is Kol So Sheyagbia Mecher V'Ya'ara Esa, and he throws it into the Kelev Shel Mecher, which has a din over here of Kelev Shel Lekeach, is Nigmar Mechirah Hail Ein HaPeiros B'Rishus HaMecher, because Lepel it's not B'Rishus HaMecher, it's either B'Rishus Shel Shneim, or it's B'Rishus B'Simta, or it's B'Rishus HaLekeach. Hail ve'ein ha'peiros b'rishus ha'mecher, and also v'lei b'rishus ha'lekeach. V'i'ilu lehoya ha'peiros b'kelev shel mecher, kivin shehem b'rishus lekeach, konem mishaposak. Afal pi shalei modet k'mei shebiyanu. In other words, if the kelim, if the original peiros wouldn't have been b'kelev shel mecher, and it was lying in rishus of lekeach, so as long as they make up, as soon as they make up that a kur for shleishim seller, so the deal is made. Over here, the reason why you need another Ma'aseh Kinyan is because the item finds itself b'kelev shel mecher. So mainly you need a Ma'aseh Kinyan. What's the Ma'aseh Kinyan? The Ma'aseh Kinyan is the fact that the mecher is pouring this item into Kelev Shel Mecher B'Shvil Alekech. So Mela it has it in Kilu, he's putting it in Rishus Alekech. But so then it depends. If the kinyan was on the Shleishim, on the Kur, so then he could have Charata until he makes the whole Maisa kinyan on the Kur. Masha'enkin, if the kinyan was on each saw, so each saw is nikna separately. Halacha Ches. So basically, what we learned over here is that there could be a Metzias where a person who knows the Kelev Shalekech is Kena. Kelev Shalekech is Kena for him, Sai in a Simta, and Sai in a Chatzah Shel Shneim, and certainly in his own Rishus, that Kelev Shalekech is Kena. Now, here there's another din over here that when the Moicher is taking from his Kalim and putting into other Kalim of his, and we're dealing with either in Rishus Alekech or in a Chatzah Shel Shneim or in a Simta, so B'meila the Kalim of the Moicher is being kind of for the Lekech, because the Moicher is giving away these Kalim for the Lekech, even though it's not becoming the Lekech's Kalim, but the Kalim is becoming, he's lending it to the Lekech, and B'meila the Lekech could be kind of with it. That's the Nekuda of this din, that it could be kind of with it. Now, when could it be kind of with it? Only obviously if it's Rishus where Kelev Shalekech could be kind. If it would be Rishus HaMecher, it wouldn't help. And then we learned another din that depends how the sale was ausgestellt. If the sale was ausgestellt, that we're selling a kur for Shleishim Sela, so Memela the sale has to be for the entire kur. So the Maisa Kinyan has to be for the entire kur. So the entire kur has to be now in those kalim, which are the new kalim, the kalim that the Mecher is pouring it into. B'shvil Alekech, for the Lekech to be koina the entire kur together. Masha'inkan, if he told him saw besela, so then he could be koina each saw separately. Now that din was talking about that there's Kelev Shalekech and there's Kelev Shel Mecher. Now there's a musa called a sarsur. A sarsur is like a middleman that's creating a sale between the seller and the buyer, and he's providing his keli in order for the seller to give the item to the buyer in order to finish off the sale. So over here we say that while the keli is not yet full, so that keli is like he's lending it to the moicher. Question is, at which point in time do we say the sarsur is lending it to the moicher, and at which point in time is the sarsur lending it to the lekech? So we say until it's full, so he's lending it to the moicher, and once it's full, he's lending it to the lekech. That's this din. Allah ches. A person selling wine or oil to someone in a simta, and again the item finds itself in the kalim of the moicher, and now he has to transfer it into the kalim of the lekeach in order for the lekeach to buy it. And and the keli, which was the measuring cup, belonged to the sarsur, which was the middleman, the man that's the broker, is actually nismala samida until this keli, which the sarsur is lending, was full, is harein shel mecher. We consider the keli the meichers, and therefore the lekeach didn't buy it yet. It's not yet bekelev shel lekeach. It's the violet still bekelev shel mecher because he's lending it to the lekeach. However, Mishnah Samida, once it becomes full, so then we say now the sarsur is lending it to the lekech. Is areim b'shus lekech, and then ve'inechad ma'am yochel achzebei. As long as it was b'shus hamecher, so the sale wasn't finished. Mashenkin once it's b'shus lekech, and over here kelev shalekech could be koin in these places. So memela, so the sale is nigmar. V'chein peiris shoyetzvurin b'simta. You have peiris which are piled in a simta, and the midah doesn't belong not to the mecher and not to the lekech. It's a friend, the person which is lending this keli, and the hamoicher made it, and the mecher was filling up this keli which was being lent to them in order to make the sale. Is again actually in the smaller samida before the keli was filled up. Is arei b'shus hamecher? It's still b'shus hamecher. However, mishnah smaller samida, once that keli was filled up, so then we not say b'shus lekech. So the same idea like a sarsur. Because when a person lends a keli, so the stam das is he lends the keli to the mecher to fill it up, and then once it's filled up, so it's being lent to the lekech. Halacha yud hoisa hamida shel echad. So in halacha test we were talking about that the midah belonged to a third person. So we had a case in halacha ches where there was the sarsur, which is pretty much the same like a third person. A sarsur, we assume that until it's filled, he's giving it to the moicher, and once it's filled, he's giving it to the lekech, so it has a din of kelev shalekech. Then we had also peiris, which were the mecher, that it was filled with a third person. So again, and the moicher is being moided. So the question is it considered kelev shalekech? Once it's filled, it's considered kelev shalekech. Until it's filled, it's still considered kelev shalmecher. Now, halacha yud, hoisa amida shalechad mem, if the midah belonged to one of them, to the lekech or to the mecher, and now v'hoye barishamim, lay the chetzio shlisho revio kiyetzmem. So if you have a keli, which the measuring cup is when it's full, you know how much it is. Then you can have a measuring cup which has markers. It has markers that when it's half full, tells you how much, where it's half full, and how much it is by half full. It tells you this at this point. There's different markers of the measurement. Is kiven shehigia l'roishim in arishamim. Once it reaches to one of those markers of the measurements, is kana rishon immediately by is kana aval pishalei nisma lamida. So in other words, when you're saying that you got it from someone else, either from a sarsur or you're getting it from a third person, so then when is it becoming kelev shalekech? It's only kelev shalekech when it was filled. Masha'inkin, if the item actually is kelev shalekech, or the item is actually kelev shalmecher, and the mecher is giving it to the lekech because the mecher wants to affect the sale, so he's pouring it into this kalim, which is his kalim, and it's becoming kelev shalekech, like we learned before. So over there, you don't have to wait until it fills up in order to become kelev shalekech. As soon as it reaches the marker, it's already considered kelev shalekech. That's like kiven sheigir l'reishim in arishamim is kana rishon afal pi shalei nismalas amida. Shekol reishim, each reishim has a din k'mida b'fnei atzmei, has a din like amida b'fnei atzmei sharei shel echad mem hi amida. And who say mechal risham shabas. No, since this midah belongs to one of them, and they're relying on those markers, so therefore it's considered already b'rshus halikech when it reaches a marker. So that's this din. No, the nekudas advarim is that in order for the likech to be kain, it has to be b'kelev shalikech. It has to be b'kelev shalikech, and it has to be in a place where the kelev shalikech could be kain. So b'rshus hamecher or b'rshus harab kelev shalkein can be kain. Kelev shalkein can be kain. Masha'en kain, if it's b'rshus shel shneim, or it's besimta, so then the rishus lekech could be kena. But what happens if it's not mamish kelev shel kena? It's not mamish shel kena. So we're saying there could be a hechatimza where it's really kelev shel mecher, but the mecher is lending it to the lekech. The mecher is pouring something into the mecher's kelim, and he's lending it to the lekech, so it becomes as if it's kelev shel lekech. Then there could be a mitzvah of a sarsur where also it has a din of kelev shalekech, but that's only after it's filled. And al derazeh, when the keli doesn't belong to either the mecher or the lekech, so once it's filled, then it belongs to the lekech. And then you can have a hechatimtza of a keli which has markers, and it belongs either to the mecher or to the lekech. So once it reaches the marker, so Mamela is considered kelev shalekech, and he's kaina. Now the emes is, if it's kelev shalekech mamish, why does it have to reach the marker? L'chura kelev shalekech mamish is kaina without a marker. In other words, when it's a kelev shalmecher, you could say he's only being maknit once it reaches the marker. But if it's the kelev shalekech mamish, so enochinami. If the kelev shalekech would be in rishus of the lekeach, so then taka you wouldn't have to wait till it goes until the marker. Then the kelev shalekech would be kaina for the lekech, even without it reaching that place of the midah. Masha'inkin over here we're talking about in a case like he starts in halacha tes that they would tzvurim besimte bechatzis shel shneim. So it wasn't b'rshus halikech, and nevertheless the kelev shalikech is being kaina. So the kelev shalikech is only kaina b'chiyah gavna when it reaches it either full, or if there's markers when it reaches the marker when the mecher is pouring into the shus of the lekech. Halacha yudalef ze klal gadol yeh biyotcha. This should be the klal gadol. Hakoines hametaltel in posek adom if they made up the price, and v'achar kach higbiya he made a ma'isa agbo which is a ma'isa kinyan kona. However, v'migbiyah tchila, first he made a ma'isa kinyan, and then v'hineach he puts down the keli, and then v'achar kach pasach adomim, then they make up a price as late kona b'isa agbo. And there's a ma'isa kinyan before pisuk domim is not a kinyan because there's no gmiras das. Achi agbiyah until he makes a ma'isa agbo, which is a ma'isa kinyan achar shapasach. A yimshem though shein darkel agbiyah. A different type of Maisa Kinyan, Maisa Meshicha, when Hagbo, when it's not regular to make Hagbo. So that's because Hagbo always works. Meshicha doesn't always work. So the Ram says Hagbo or Meshicha if Meshicha works. Halacha Yud Beis. Now this is saying that you need Psikas Adomim if it's not clear what the price is. If we're talking about something which everyone knows it's a regular price, there's a set price for this item, and vehigbiya, and then the buyer went ahead and picked it up, is kono aval bisha pasak, even though they made up a price achashigbiya, because it's a known price, you don't have to really make up the price. Other things which you kena metaltalin, and those other ma'asekinyan, like we learned the Hampshire that there's a ma'asekinyan of a ma'asekinyan, in other words, like chlipin, for example. All other ways that being koine metaltalin should tzarech liknus bem in order to be koine metaltalin is only achar sheyifsik adom, only after they made up a price. Elim kain dom of ksuvim k'mei shebiyarnu. So if you're buying an item which is dom of ksuvim, everyone knows the price. It's a pashta zach what the price is, so you don't have to make up any price. Masha'inkin, if it's not dom of ksuvim, so in order to make a kinyan on an item, it has to be a pisik adom lefichach. So therefore, as azoy hamoishech chamorim upoyalim. You have people, chamora means donkey drivers that are transporting things, or palim are workers which are also people that transport things, and you schlep them into your house. So when you schlep them into your house, side the chamorim which have the items with them on the chamerim or on themselves, or the palim which have the items, so that there's no kinyan. There was no maisa kinyan even, because that's not a meshicha. Meshicha when you schlep in an item, not when you schlep in an item which is on top of a chamer. Like we learned before, is im modad actually posek hadomim. If you went ahead and measured this tvua, which was on the chamorim and the pelim, but you didn't yet set up a price, is afila hoya lekech who made it. Even though lekech was the one that was making the medida, so he made a maisag bo mamish, a sheposek hadomim, or he made a psikas hadomim v'achar kach modad amecher, but lepel afterwards the mecher was the one that made the medida. And he didn't make it into the Kalev Shel Mecher. He made the Medida, and he put it down. And it's still in an Eifan that the Leker doesn't have a Maisa Kinyan on it. There was no Maisa Kinyan of the Leker. It was Pasik Adam, and there was a Moded HaMecher, he made a Maisa Agbo, but there was no Maisa Kinyan for the Leker. Ishnei Michael Lazarem, because there was no Maisa Kinyan of the Leker. Pirkun HaLeker, the Leker unloaded it, and he brought it into his house. Now, Vaisto is the item still finds itself in Kalev Shel Lekech, as Kalev Shel Mecher, and therefore the Lekech is not really koina, even though he was Pirkon and Echnisin L'Teich Beisei. Is as a im Pasik Adam, if he was Pasik Adam of Acharkach Madach HaMecher, and then the Mecher was maided, and even though he was maided into his own Kalim, so we're koina in Shnei Michel Lazabam Shari Somcha Daita Limker, because he there was a smichas das limker. He made up with him a price. Memela, he's willing to sell for this price, and he's willing to buy for this price. However, v'modad actually pasak, if the medida, the ma'asekinyan happened before there was a psika, so then shnei michel lazerbem shali somcha daite adayin limker v'afilu modad alekech. So even if in other words, if there was a psika, so even if later there was modad hamecher, and we say before that modad hamecher also ma'asekinyan, because he's being made into the Caleb Shalik, even though he was being made into his own Caleb. But we say he's like makna those Caleb to the Lekeach, so therefore there's a Maisa Kinyan. Masha'en Kain, if there was no Psika, so even if the Lekeach himself was the Modat, so there was L'chura stronger Maisa Kinyan. But nevertheless, since there was no Psika, so there's no Smichas Das. That's the Nekudas Advar. Halacha Yudalet, Hanoitel Caleb Mebeso Uman Amunas Levakram. Person takes kalim and beso uman. A person that makes kalim, he takes it from him, and he wants to check it. He's not 100% sure he wants to buy it. Is imhoyu dom of ktsuvim? There was a fixed price for this item, and lepeil is nanas biyodov. It was nanas by this person that took it. Is chayiv b'domov. Why? Because hail v'domov ktsuvim is me'eshe igbiyei nasa b'rshusei. As soon as he picks it up, he made a ma'asekinyan, so it becomes b'rshusei. In order for this to happen, that the item should be considered b'rshusei me'eshe higbiyei is first of all shiagbiyen k'delikus iskule. If it's an item that's made out of kama chalokim, so it has to be that he wants to be koina the entire item. That's first of all, and also v'yeh oisei chayfetz hanimker chava lekech. It's something which lekech has a chvivus for it. So the pastos is that he's interested in the item. In other words, even though they didn't make up clear a price, but we're talking about something which is dom of Yeduyim, it's something which he's really interested in. So Einachinami, he has a right to return it. So, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't kainet yet. Ba'atzim, he was kainet. It's just he's reserving the right that he could return it. But at this point in time, we're talking about something that he picked up al manas to keep the entire item, and it's something which is chava alav. So we assume that the chayfetz belongs to the lekech, and if an einus occurs, so it's the lekech's loss. Avol, if we're talking about chayfetz shamecher kotzpei, v'mevakesh v'reidev l'mochri, you know, something which the moicher is not really interested in. It's not something which is chaviv. First he spoke about chava lekech, now he's talking about something that the moicher is kotzpei, so the pastor is not chava lekech either. So then we say, and the moicher is trying to get rid of it, maybe he's putting it at a very low price. So the din is harei b'rshus hamecher ad sheyifsek adam, until they make up klor. Whereas over here you can't falozich the dom of ksuvim. Because you have to make up klora price, and then v'yagbiyan o lekech, and then the lekech should pick it up. Achid shaposak, after they make up the price. So if we're talking about something which is chaviv, so since we're dealing something the dom of ksuvim, some meles bershusei, without having psika. Masha'inkin, if we're dealing something which is amecher kotzbei, so then in order for it to be considered that it's mamish his, and that the Maisa Kinyan was a Maisa Kinyan and it was a Gemiras Das, is only if there was a Beferish of Yifsik Domim and then he makes a Maisa Kinyan, so then it becomes Bershusei. Halacha Tezvav, Echad HaMeshech, Eya Magbia Machzub Gatzma, when you say a person made a Meshicha, or a person made a Magbo, or a person made a Chazok, is whether he did it himself, Esha Amalachar, Lagbia, Elim Shech Le'elazig, or he has someone else to make for him these Maisa Kinyanim. Is either way hareza zochale. So it knows the ma'aser to be zoich on something, you don't have to make the ma'aser kinyan yourself. If someone makes the ma'aser kinyan on your behalf and you ask him to, says b'seider v'chein b'shar darkei haknoya. So everything, all the darkei haknoya, could be done through a shlich.